White plays pawn to e4. Black plays pawn to e5. White plays knight to f3. Black plays knight to c6. White plays bishop to c4. Black plays knight to f6. White plays pawn to d3. Black plays bishop to c5. White plays pawn to c3. Black plays king to g8. White plays king to g1. Black plays pawn to d6. White plays pawn to b4. Black plays bishop to b6. White plays pawn to 4. Black plays pawn to a5. White plays pawn to b5. Black plays knight to e7. White plays knight to d2. Black plays knight to g6. White plays pawn to d4. Black plays bishop to g4. White plays queen to c2. Black plays queen to d7. White plays rook to e1. Black plays rook to e8. White plays bishop to a3. Black plays knight to f4. White plays bishop to f1. Black plays bishop to f3. White plays knight to f3. Black plays queen to g4. White plays king to h1. Black plays knight to h3. White plays rook to e3. Black plays knight to g5. White plays pawn to h3. Black plays queen to h5. White plays knight to g5. Black plays queen to g5. White plays rook to d1. Black plays queen to g6. White plays bishop to d3. Black plays knight to h5. White plays pawn to g3. Black plays rook to e7. White plays bishop to b2. Black plays rook to e8. White plays rook to e1. Black plays queen to f6. White plays king to g2. Black plays queen to e6. White plays rook to f3. Black plays knight to f6. White plays pawn to e5. Black plays knight to d7. White plays pawn to d6. Black plays queen to d6. White plays rook to f4. Black plays knight to e5. White plays rook to d1. Black plays rook to d7. White plays bishop to e2. Black plays queen to e7. White plays rook to d7. Black plays queen to d7. White plays bishop to c1. Black plays queen to e6. White plays pawn to h4. Black plays knight to g6. White plays rook to f5. Black plays queen to e4. White plays queen to e4. Black plays rook to e4. White plays bishop to f3. Black plays rook to e5. White plays rook to g5. Black plays pawn to h6. White plays rook to e5. Black plays knight to e5. White plays bishop to e4. Black plays pawn to h5. White plays pawn to f3. Black plays pawn to g6. White plays king to f1. Black plays knight to d7. White plays pawn to g4. Black plays knight to f6. White plays bishop to b7. Black plays pawn to g4. White plays bishop to g5. Black plays knight to d7. White plays pawn to g4. Black plays knight to c5. White plays bishop to c6. Black plays knight to a4. White plays bishop to f6. Black plays bishop to c5. White plays king to e2. Black plays knight to b6. White plays king to d3. Black plays pawn to 4. White plays pawn to c4. Black plays pawn to a3. White plays king to c3. Black plays bishop to f8. White plays king to b3. Black plays bishop to g7. White plays bishop to d8. Black plays bishop to e5. White plays pawn to c5. Black plays knight to a4. White plays bishop to e7. Black plays king to g7. White plays king to a3. Black plays knight to b2. White plays king to b3. Black plays pawn to f5. White plays pawn to f5. Black plays pawn to f5. White plays pawn to b6. Black plays pawn to b6. White plays pawn to b6. Black plays knight to d3. White plays king to c4. Black plays knight to f4. White plays bishop to d7. Black plays knight to g2. White plays king to d5. Black plays bishop to g3. White plays bishop to f5. Black plays knight to h4. White plays bishop to e4. Black plays knight to g6. White plays bishop to g6.